So this is Mark Clintberg. So he has got a BFA from the Alberta College of Art and Design from 2001, and an MA in art history from Concordia in 2008, and then later on a Ph.D. in art history from Concordia, which I did not write down the date for, but it was 2013? Yeah, that's it. I went through a list of achievements, and then I decided that I probably shouldn't pick and choose because he has an 8-page CV, and it's really hard to pick out the important ones, but he was shortlisted for a Sobey Award in 2013 and longlisted for one in 2016, representing the prairies in northern Canada. He has shown internationally and has written a ton, and I have apparently been a fan for quite a while because I saw his piece called Love Empire a few years back, which is a stage setup. It was set up in the National Gallery with a microphone for you to stand up and announce your love for somebody. Or if you want to cuddle underneath the stage, that is also a possibility. And I just found out that yesterday that was him, so so I am a fan, and I am honored to introduce him. So here's Mark Clintberg.
Thanks for that introduction. Yeah, I was the one under the stage. Okay, so it's really a delight to be here, and it's so nice to see a full house. Thank you so much for coming tonight. As an educator, I respect anyone that can make a voyage out at the end of term to see an artist talk, so thanks for making it out here. I thought I would start off by sharing this work with you, which is an audio piece called Quiet Disco that maybe needs to be just a little bit louder. This is a piece that, it's a little too quiet. This is a piece that I often play as people are coming into my artist talks, but tonight, since people were already so loud, you're all being too talkative, I thought I would wait until afterwards so you could kind of get the atmospheric effect of it. So this is an audio work that's created as an edition of 500 pressed vinyl records, and it's a collaborative work between me and a Montreal-based DJ named David Shaw. And the impetus for the work comes out of a certain former relationship of mine where I was often staying over at a partner's house who had paper-thin walls, like so many walls in Montreal. Who's lived there, you know. And often at night when we were trying to fall asleep, there would be this neighbor who was having these incredible parties and like playing dance music, and he and I would just like lie there completely frustrated and so angry because we had to get up and do our jobs the next morning. But on seeking my, or kind of like looking for other feelings that were lurking, I realized that I wasn't just feeling frustrated, it also made me feel really left out and kind of lonely even, to hear music like this coming through the wall and think, okay, I wish I was invited. You know, that would have been really nice to invite your neighbors. But yeah, feeling this kind of mixture of isolation and frustration and desire. And so what I wanted to do, oops, sorry, that's something else. What I wanted to do with that piece was create a kind of, kind of affective and spatial environment that would use acoustics to communicate something emotional, I guess, that kind of like blend of frustration and desire. Okay, so that sets the stage for this stage, which was referred to in your introduction. So I still sometimes show this in artist talks because it's a piece that's important for me as the beginning of a question about what I would do as an artist from that point on, really. This is a work that was commissioned for the 2005 Alberta Biennial by Catherine Croston and Anthony Kendall. Those were the two curators that put the show together. And this piece arose out of a practice of automatic writing and drawing. And I have this kind of ongoing recourse to automatic writing to develop texts for my work, because I'm always kind of carnivore for text or omnivore for text. I'm always looking for the next text that I might incorporate into my work, and automatic writing is one way that I seek that text out. So I had generated a series of drawings that those two curators saw, and one of those drawings was a picture of a kind of placard that was mounted on a stage, and the placard just said, "Love Empire." And at the end of the studio visit, after they looked through a lot of my drawings, I thought, oh, maybe I'll contribute some drawings to this exhibition. They actually asked me, well, out of all of the drawings that you've shown us, which of those would you most want to realize as an object? And that wasn't something that had really occurred to me. In fact, in the context of the studio visit, I referred to them as ideas for impossible installations, because to me, someone who at the time had absolutely no skill in carpentry and no money to throw around, I just imagined I could never really make a stage on this kind of scale. So they said, which one would you like to realize? And I said, Love Empire. And they said, well, we think so too, so welcome to the show. Which then was kind of a gauntlet thrown down for me to learn how to build something like this, of course with some assistance from some technicians. Okay, so I think the piece has already been adequately described, but there are a few things that I wanted to add to that description. The first of which is a reference to the text itself, which is a kind of photocopy collage that's a blow-up that's produced from a very, very small painting that's based on that original piece of automatic writing. And the way that the piece functions is that every time that the piece is installed, there's a new layer of this Xerox wallpaper that's added over top of it. And if you look carefully, you can see that right down the middle of it is the seam for these two 4x8 sheets of plywood. So you have to cut the piece in half to take the piece apart. You have to cut that wallpaper in half and destroy it in order to take the piece down every time. So one of the reasons that this piece is important for me still is because it works with this foundation of automatic writing, but it was also a moment where I was really grappling with participation as a component in my practice and wondering if participation would be the bedrock of everything that I would do from that point on. And as you've already learned, the idea here is that people can use this microphone in a participatory fashion to declare their love for something or someone. And I realized quite quickly after installing the work that people would use the microphone for whatever they wanted, and not necessarily for these declarations of love. And at the opening event, there were people who told knock-knock jokes and sang songs. And maybe if I was of a different disposition, I would be irritated by that, or see that as an affront or not following the rules of the work. But those kind of evasions of my invitation really intrigued me and began to make me think that setting a lure for participation might not always go quite the way that I imagined. And it set up a bit of a crisis for me as an artist, imagining like, well, maybe participation isn't the answer that I thought it was, or at least not in the form that I'd originally envisioned, that invitations for participation within my own practice perhaps needed to be a little bit more oblique, or maybe dramatically confused in some fashion, that to just set forward a really straight up invitation like this one was in some sense inadequate to what I really wanted to achieve in my work, which was really more connected to a kind of sense of ambiguity, I guess, and unsettlement, rather than presenting some kind of clear invitation, which is going to come out as a thread throughout a few different practices or projects. Okay, so this is the piece from the reverse, and you can see that there's this kind of environment underneath the stage that you can enter into, and underneath the stage there are two pillows, and there's a sleeping bag, and here's Heather Anderson occupying that space very happily. And the idea here was to respond in a kind of indirect way to the work of Vito Acconci and Seedbed. For those of you who don't know, this is a performance work. I guess I can say seminal in this kind of setting because normally I'm not such a big fan of the word seminal. A seminal performance work where Vito Acconci is positioned underneath a false floor that's at an angle with the original gallery floor, and he has a microphone, and he's masturbating and vocalizing his kind of fantasy while performing this erotic act. And that piece is something that came up a lot in my undergraduate education, which was in part at NASCAD. And I had this kind of ambivalent response to that work for a lot of reasons. One of which was that I had some objections. Well, there are many reasons that I object to that work, but one of them was that I didn't really like the fact that the viewer wasn't given the opportunity to explore erotically with the artist. And I thought that it would be interesting to create a scenario that did open up a kind of gateway for eros in the gallery, not just for the artist, but for the visitor to the exhibition. So this undercarriage of the piece is really meant to be that gateway to eros, but the other function of it is that if, you're considering going up to use the microphone to make some big declaration and you're nervous about it, then you could actually use this space to sort of psych yourself up to make that declaration. Or then if things didn't go very well, you could go and take refuge in this space instead. Then again, I mean, from what I've heard about the piece, more people have visited the space with a companion rather than by themselves. And I'm happy to say that the sleeping bag is frequently dry cleaned. Okay, so that first piece that I just showed you is from 2005, and this is a piece that I made just last year. It's an edition of silk-screened patches that I made in collaboration with SNAP, the Society of Northern Alberta Printmakers, or is it print artists? I can't remember which, in Edmonton. And they invited me to do some kind of print multiple, and this is the project that I came up with for that multiple, which is mailed out to subscribers. It's kind of like a multiple subscription service. The scale of this piece is, I don't know, I'd say roughly like 2 by 5 inches or so. And my idea here was to create a print multiple that would be stitchable onto someone's jacket or a bag or a backpack in a kind of DIY aesthetic. The term itself is maybe one that some of you are familiar with or can guess the meaning of, but it comes out of my interest in frottage as both an erotic methodology and an artistic methodology. So to perform frottage as an artistic methodology means to take a sheet of paper and place it upon a textured surface and then use graphite or charcoal or some other material to take a rubbing of that texture and then make a recording, a kind of facsimile of that texture onto the sheet of paper, and then you take it away with you. And frottage is something that's often performed in graveyards. That is the artistic methodology of frottage, is often, well, who knows, right? Is often performed in graveyards. Like go see Oscar Wilde's grave and take a rubbing of, what's written on the stone there. And for me, thinking about that artistic or material methodology of frottage has been really useful in reflecting on my own practice as an art historian, because as was said in my introduction, I did my Ph.D. work in art history, and part of my graduate work was devoted to a study of the artist Felix Gonzalez Torres, a Cuban-born artist who died in the United States of America of AIDS-related illness in the 90s. And in studying Gonzalez Torres, I realized that I had this kind of growing emotional attachment to this artist that I wondered about, as if I was veering into methodologically dangerous territory, too much affection for my object of study, not objective enough with my object of study. And because of those kind of concerns or questions, I started to think about how I could fruitfully encounter an artist who has died and encounter their work, and retain that kind of affective excitement and thrill and affection for what they have done and what they represent, and actually incorporate that into my methodology instead of trying to erase it somehow. And in imagining how that methodology might hang together, I came across this idea of frottage. And one of the reasons that that idea appealed to me is because I like this implication that every time that we encounter an artwork or whatever cultural practice made by someone else, whether they're living or dead, we bring along to that object of study a kind of thin tissue of our own emotional state, and then we actually use that to take an imprint or an emboss or a rubbing of what that work represented for each of us subjectively. So for me, the method of frottage helps me to think about that sense of attachment in a really positive way as something that really should be written into my art history, into how I approach writing art history. Then, of course, there's the other dimension of frottage, which is the sexual dimension. So if any of you are interested in reading more, I highly recommend The Joy of Gay Sex, which has a great section on frottage. This is a form of erotic pleasure that usually occurs with clothing on, and often in nightclubs or sometimes in other semi-public spaces where people can rub against one another for the sake of pleasure. Not always to, some kind of climactic ending, but just really for the sake of closeness. Okay, so now I should have said from the beginning that this is going to be a rather sexual kind of talk. I hope I haven't caught anybody too off guard. But all of that, I hope, helps to set up what this term frotteur might mean, which is that if you're a person that performs frottage, then that means that you are a frotteur. You're someone who enjoys rubbing against others or against other objects. And I thought that it would be quite appealing to some people to be able to have this kind of badge that they could show on the back of their jacket saying, like, I like rubbing up against things and people, not necessarily in a sexual sense, but in some kind of way implying that, I am a person who enjoys closeness and who is seeking closeness with other people and maybe other objects too. Okay, the next work I wanted to show you is a piece that was created for this space, Window, which is in Winnipeg. I'm told that it's Winnipeg's only 24-hour artist-run center. It's open to the public at all times because it's an outdoor space, so you can see it at any time of day or night. This is a space that is run by Keegan McFadden and Divya Mehra, and they invited me to do some kind of installation inside of this window, which is a little bit bigger than the size that it's projected here, just to give you a sense of the scale. And I'll just show you straight away what I ended up doing. I decided to use this window to advertise a fictional architectural environment. And for those of you who are at the back, I'll just show you what maybe that makes it a little bit easier to read. Okay, so this is an advertisement for a members-only club that features a dance club, a piano bar, a nail bar, and a milk bar, a library, vegetarian barbecue, and a crisis support center. So really you have everything that you need under one roof. And as you can see, it's established in 1968, and the entrance is on the lower level on the southeast side of the building. And those directions to find the entrance to the space were important architecturally because I had never been to Winnipeg. I still have never been to Winnipeg. And so I researched, I would love to go. I'm not saying I'm against it. I just haven't had the opportunity. So I did my research for this piece through Google Street View, a pernicious influence on artists everywhere, I'm sure. And in kind of lurking about the site virtually, I noticed that on the southeast side of the building, there was this very small wooden door that aroused my curiosity. It seemed almost like a door that would open onto some kind of like imaginary world. I'm sure it was just an entrance to like bring in the wine casks or something like that. But yeah, this door really was very arresting to me. And I thought, well, I want to use the window to advertise something about what's behind that door. This door that is never opened. It's not publicly accessible, and from what I understand, isn't ever opened any longer. It's really just a decorative door at this point. And so this sign is meant to bring into the imagination all of the possibilities of what might exist behind that door based on this description. So what kind of environment this simple text might bring to mind. The name for this members-only club is Détournement, and there are a few reasons why that name was important for me and how I came to select that name. The first one is because of the fact that I learned that Winnipeg used to have a gay and lesbian space called Detour that closed just a couple of years ago. And so this name Detour appealed to me on that level as a gay and lesbian space that used to exist but now no longer does. But also in Calgary, which is the city that I live in now and which I did live in the 90s too, there used to be a gay bar called Detour that no longer exists. And I see this happening a lot in North America, that gay and lesbian designated spaces and queer designated spaces are kind of eroding from the urban fabric. And I've heard lots of different explanations for why that's happening, like, you know, we have the internet now, we have Grindr or Bumble or whatever, so we don't really need those spaces anymore as sites of affinity. That's one explanation that I've heard. But I'm not content to accept that as an explanation for why those spaces have eroded. And I don't have the answer, but I do think that it represents a significant loss to see spaces like that vanish as someone who identifies as queer. But I have a suspicion that there's some kind of gradual depoliticization of queer community that's happened for a range of different reasons. And I don't mean to blame this on anybody, and certainly no one that's here or listening to this recording at a future date. But yeah, I just wonder about it. I wonder about it. Particularly because this is a work that I made immediately after the shootings at Pulse, which occurred last summer, a gay bar in Florida that I used to go to. And so when the news reports about that shooting came on the news, I was immediately spatialized. It was a very embodied experience for me. I had been in that space, I know that space, and to see footage, and especially diagrams and maps showing the truly horrific things that happened in that space, it was a really chilling experience for me. So it seemed important for me as an artist to immediately react by making a work that would be devoted to encouraging visibility and the establishment of safe spaces for people who are gender nonconforming on whatever level. Okay, then the other reason that I thought Détournement would be a nice title for this site or name for this fictional location is because it's a reference to the Situationist International. And this was a group of thinkers who were very radical, working in the 60s and beyond, who established a lot of really fascinating theories, also some problematic theories about the use of space and the use of architecture and the use of culture and media, and how it might be possible to appropriate or abduct cultural objects or architectural spaces in order to try and break that very resilient force of capitalism, among other goals. And one of their strategies was the strategy of the détournement, which is a strategy where you start off with some pre-existing object, like say a comic book, for instance, and you reinscribe or cut apart or represent that object in some fashion to try and break its meaning and present a new kind of meaning. So the Situationists would sometimes use comic books that were in the theme of like the Wild West, and use all of the imagery, but cut out the speech bubbles and replace those speech bubbles with their own ideas, with their own dialogue. So that's a form of détournement. And from my point of view, this work is also a form of détournement because it sets up, at least in the imagination, the occupation of this real architectural space with a kind of imaginary environment. Then I also couldn't resist making the date of establishment, 1968, a full year before Stonewall, as if like Winnipeg is so with it that in 1968, and I'm sure Winnipeg is really with it. I'm not trying to make fun of them here, but I'm from like a small Canadian city myself. Yeah, but as if a full year before Stonewall happens, there's already this like very hip with it environment happening in Winnipeg, and they're really plugged into French theory even in 1968, well before it's been translated into English. This just gives you a sense of its scale and the environment. I am one of those artists who now makes neon work. to my chagrin and surprise. And this might turn into a little bit of a confessional, but I wanted to explain to all of you why I've gone down this dangerous pathway. I'm warning any of you, really don't start because you will not be able to stop. How this came to be is really the fault of a curator, so beware of curators too. This is because of Tatiana Mellema, who is a curator now based in Vancouver, but used to be a curator working at the Illingworth Kerr Gallery at the Alberta College of Art and Design. And Tatiana and I were working on a solo exhibition of my work, and there were a few new commission pieces that were going to be included in the exhibition, and we kind of lined up what those commissions would be, and at one point Tatiana said to me, Mark, you've worked so much with text, have you ever thought about making a neon sign? And I responded, perhaps with a little more hostility than necessary. No, that's really not for me. I'm not really interested in doing that. I don't think that I can't imagine what I could possibly do in neon. And Tatiana said, well, wow, that was a really strong reaction. You might want to think about why you've reacted that way, and maybe, think about it for a while. Maybe some idea will occur to you. So I did think about it for some time, and I mentioned to you that I have this practice of automatic writing, and I had recently done a residency at the BAM Center and spent quite a bit of time in the printmaking studio, and had started doing these hand-cut stencils in paper, just with different shapes and so on. And one of the things that I cut out of this stencil was a message that said this. Just as a really quick one-off, it was all very intuitive, and after Tatiana and I had this neon sign conversation, I came across this monoprint again and thought, well, that seems like the appropriate thing to make into a neon sign, because this way the sign will just explain exactly what itself is, what it is in itself. It's an expression of what the sign materially is, which is a text message. So that seemed like a very straightforward solution. But then I was also, wow, can I be enchanted by something I made myself? That really sounds arrogant. I can't quite think of a better way to put it, but I was curious about another potential meaning of this arrangement of words based on how it's split up, which suggests that we live in a very messy time of text, which I think is absolutely true, at least from my own position, not just because of these restless devices that we carry around with us that receive text all the time, but also because of the visual field that we occupy today, especially in urban environments that are consistently layered with text, that we're kind of awash in text, I think, continually, both visually and also mentally, I guess, that text is always rolling around in my head, whether it's a text message that I recently received on my phone or a "what are you looking at" message that I keep looking at behind all of you on the wall over there. So this work was an attempt to grapple with that situation of messy text. Okay, so that neon work was a kind of entry point to an array of other neon pieces that I've done, including one that was a response to this site, the Cecil Hotel, which now no longer exists. It's now a parking lot, but I'll get into that more in a moment. This was one of the first hotels to be built in the city of Calgary, and it went through many different chapters in terms of the users of this site of hospitality. But probably in the popular imagination of Calgarians, the most dominant idea starting around the 80s and 90s was that this was a site used by people who are substance users and sex workers, people who are dangerous, underprivileged populations, including indigenous communities, using this site and frequently causing problems seemed to be the ongoing narrative presented in the popular press. And because of these very negative associations between this building and acts of violence, the city eventually forced the closure of this building. And as you can see, if you have excellent vision, in the final year of its operation, the police were called to this site 1,700 times in 365 days. At least this is the number that's been dragged or rehearsed by the media more than once. So the city forced its closure and then bought the building for just under $11 million. And there wasn't exactly any clear public message about what would happen to this space for at least a couple of years, which for me as an artist raised a lot of questions. I'd been interested in this site for quite some time aesthetically, as ridiculous as that sounds based on what I've just told you about its history, because of its iconic quality on the Calgary skyline. This is a sign that if you had visited Calgary before its demolition, you almost undoubtedly would have seen it at some point. It's kind of like the Farine Five Roses sign in Montreal. So I had already started to think that I might want to do something with this sign for the Cecil Hotel, but I wasn't exactly sure what. Then after the city of Calgary bought this building, Mayor Nenshi, who's our current mayor, went on record saying that the only architectural component worth preserving from this building was its sign. And when I read that, it grabbed my attention right away, that this very public and forward-thinking mayor is saying that there's nothing else of architectural value here. Now, it's not that I mean to suggest that the building should have been saved because maybe it could have been rehabilitated on some material level, but it's more that once the building was demolished, there was no clear program for what would happen to the demographics that use this space. And one thing that still puzzles me to this day is that there's hard data that demonstrates that every time one of these affordable hotels or forms of affordable housing shut down in Calgary, the user rate for homeless shelters goes through the roof. So it's not as if the populations that use this boarding house just decide to leave the city, or they just, disappear or something. They end up still living in the city. They're still citizens of the city of Calgary. So this kind of lack of clear plan for those demographics and for serving that population continued to trouble me. And the other thing that I learned through the research of Kevin Allen, who's a historian in Calgary, is that the Cecil Hotel was also a hangout for the lesbian community in the 70s, and there were actually lesbian softball leagues that would regularly meet here for beers after their games. And I thought that series of episodes in the history of this hotel had been completely overshadowed by this one narrative about the problematic Calgarians who use this site, and that they represent evil, death, and darkness, which is just such a shallow narrative, really. I'm not exactly, oh, wait, here we go, that's why. Okay, so moving forward, what happened was the site was demolished. It turned into a parking lot because, according to the city of Calgary, there was a real need for more parking in that neighborhood, more gravel lots that would be low density parking even. And On my running route, I pass by that parking lot 3 times a week usually, and I can tell you from empirical observation that there is no need for more parking in this space. So it's just a convenient cover story. And I guess I'm being recorded saying that. But I really do believe that it is a kind of cover story that serves an ideological purpose. So the erasure of this building is a way of trying to erase the history of the demographics, the people who use this site. And as, just from my position, I find that just to be really disgusting. So I felt that I should do something about that as an artist. I guess the next chapter of the story is that this original sign for the Cecil Hotel was retrieved and taken care of and then represented last fall, at another former hotel called the King Edward. And I'm not going to go too much into the story of why it's there, but basically the sign is now publicly visible, but in an indoor environment. So you can still see the sign in Calgary. All right. All of that that's a very long introduction for a single artwork. Thanks for sticking with me while I went through it. What I decided I wanted to do was make some kind of object or a series of objects that would invite a conversation about the legacy of the Cecil Hotel. And in thinking about this work, I had originally thought, well, maybe this is, an opportunity for some kind of social practice project where there's a long series of consultations between me as the artist and a number of different users of the site, or city councilors or something of that kind. But in many ways, that model seemed inadequate to me in terms of what I really wanted to accomplish. So this project is a bit like social practice reverse engineered. So instead of using the consultation to develop what the object is, I use the object to start a conversation about how the consultation might work, if that reversal makes sense. And reversal is really at the core of how I responded, because what I decided to do was make a scaled down replica of the Cecil Hotel modeled in reverse. So right now you're seeing it from the back, which means that the letters are the right way around. And this is what it looks like from the front, so the letters are backward. Now, at a certain point, this piece really started off as a work that had the support of the city of Calgary. So originally it was meant to be a commissioned temporary public artwork, and there are a range of different possibilities that we discussed about how this piece might be installed. One possibility was that it would be positioned in a suburb of Calgary to suggest that the legacies of the Cecil Hotel equally matter even in a suburb like Tuscany. Yes, there is a suburb called Tuscany in Calgary. That, all of the social endemic problems connected to the Cecil Hotel site aren't just restricted to the downtown core, but there's actually a stake even in the suburbs. But for whatever reason, the city very abruptly decided not to support the project any longer. And it was after they already not already it was after they knew that I was doing this kind of replica of the sign. Anyhow, so instead I decided to still pursue the project, but present it in a gallery setting, and then use this artist-run center environment, which is Truck Gallery, as a starting point for a conversation. So after the piece had been exhibited for, I think it was maybe 4 or 5 weeks, what we did is we had a roundtable discussion at the Calgary Public Library downtown location that included speakers that were not selected by me, but were selected by the Artist-Run Center staff. Particularly Rochelle Bearhat and Ginger Carlson were involved in that selection. And the idea was to bring together a bunch of different perspectives on what this site had been and what it represents for the future of Calgary and for the people that use the site. So the sign really is just an excuse to get a conversation going. And you can see that well, actually you can't see, but the letters are slightly pink. And if I just go back here, the original sign is red, and I wanted to work with a color of neon that would suggest this kind of washed out effect, as if it had lost its color over time. But also I wanted to use the light of the sign in order to illuminate another element of the project that was inside the gallery. So the sign is an excuse for a conversation, but it's also a lighting fixture. And the other element that was in the exhibition was a series of custom printed pint glasses that all have the name of the Cecil Hotel printed in reverse, but of course, since it's glass, if you just turn the glass around, then it's the right way around. And these pint glasses were set up inside of the boxes from the manufacturer at the very back of the gallery. So the sign is what makes it possible to even see that those glasses exist. And I'll tell you what my original plan was, and then I'll tell you what actually happened. This is kind of like a big lesson for me as an artist. So my original plan was, well, I'll have these pint glasses on exhibition, and then, you know, after the show is done, what I'm going to do is take individual glasses out with me into different bars and restaurants that I visit in Calgary, and I'm gonna leave them behind on the table or the bar whenever I'm done having my drink or having my meal, and they'll be there for either the next person that uses the table to take with them, or they'll just be absorbed into the ecology of that restaurant environment, and then maybe a week later, somebody's glass of milk will be served in this Cecil Hotel glass, even though they're having a meal at a restaurant that has no affiliation with the Cecil Hotel. So the plan that I had was that these glasses would serve as a kind of memory aid or a spark for conversation or reflection when people would encounter them by chance. Okay, so that's what I thought was going to happen. But what actually happened is that during the middle of the opening, the director of the space, Ginger, came to me with a look of concern and said, "Mark, people are stealing the glasses." And I'm not really sure how to respond to that. Actually, one of your co-faculty is taking one right now and putting it in her purse. And that was a moment where I just decided I really had to listen as an artist to what was happening with the work and not intervene, at least for the sake of my profession as an instructor. Didn't want to cause problems with that co-faculty who also happens to be a chair. But yeah, I just thought it was a good moment to pay attention to how people were reacting to the work, which was that they felt entitled to take this kind of fragment associated with their memories of this site, take it with them as if it really was their very own. And that, I think that kind of sense of entitlement doesn't come from nowhere. I think it's something that's probably really deeply rooted subjectively in the people who decided to take the glasses. So what's evolved is that basically if you see one of these, just take it, no matter where you see it. So if, you know, and I've told my students this, like, oh, so if you're having a meeting with that chair, you know, you can just take the glass, and that's just how the piece works now. So, so I've really changed my tune in terms of how this artist multiple functions. Although there are still people who don't believe that I didn't have this whole thing planned from the start, but I really did not have theft as part of my plan. Okay. This next work is a piece that was commissioned for the Dunlop in Regina. And this is another text that came out of my practice of automatic writing, and it's part of a series of works that I've done recently that just investigate the use of the term not. And the impetus for this work was thinking about the type of language, the type of affective language that we use to describe, the type of spatial language that we use to describe our feelings. And at the time, I was reading this really incredible book called Queer Phenomenology by Sarah Ahmed, where she gives a very detailed analysis of how spatial terms crop up in our language all the time when we're talking about what we feel or how we identify subjectively on lots of different registers. And this phrase of being over someone had been kind of winding around in my mind for some time, because I think that the spatial possibilities of being over someone are worth thinking about. So when we say, oh, I'm over that person, whether it's an ex-partner or an ex-friend or an ex-colleague or whoever, when we say that we're over them, we mean that we've somehow moved beyond them, as if we've literally jumped over top of them. And I think it suggests a kind of, some kind of mastery too, being above somebody, that you've actually risen above all of their inadequacies or the frustrations that you experienced with them. And this kind of spatial reflection that is so subjective and so embodied had been on my mind with the phrase, over you. And my original idea when I was approached to make a piece for the space was that I would do a sign that just said, not over you, because I didn't feel that I could actually claim being over anyone. I find myself consistently haunted by a range of different relationships, whether they're romantic, filial, familial, whatever. And this sense of haunting is something that I find comforting, actually, rather than distressing or a blockage for starting some new relationship. I think that it's possible to be haunted by former relation in a way that's exhilarating and empowering, where we actualize through those hauntings and through the lessons of those former relationships. This piece is really meant to be a tribute to that positive view of being haunted by former relation. The type treatment is one that comes directly from Cecil Hotel. I was working on these pieces at the same time, and those of you who are font nerds will right away recognize that this is Futura, but it's actually a modified version of Futura because the Cecil Hotel sign is a modified version of Futura. Imagine being a sign maker in the 1960s, bending aluminum and neon tubing. You don't have live trace, so you're not really going to be able to precisely copy Futura. Instead, you're kind of gonna make your own version of it, and that's what happened with the Cecil Hotel sign. And so I wanted to kind of further fulfill that legacy of this modified, distorted, queer version of Futura with yet another work that would work with that type treatment of Futura. But it was also because I wanted to make a companion work for the Cecil Hotel that would, in another sense, communicate my own sense of dis-ease with the ultimate outcome of the Cecil Hotel site, that it had been demolished, that I think this is a site that the city of Calgary is most certainly not over. Okay, this next image is kind of an explanation for why people started taking the pint glasses, which is that I have this very bad habit as an artist of making artist multiples, print multiples that are takeaway posters. Those of you who know Felix Gonzalez-Torres' work and heard me already say his name can absolutely sense that this is a gesture in reference to the legacy of that important artist practice. So it's an artist multiple, it's an offset print that features a hand-rendered version of the text from Not Over You, as you can see. So it has that kind of armature around it. So this is something that I painted after the sign had been manufactured as a kind of reflection on a fantasy of what I thought the sign would be. And then very recently, a space in Calgary called Contemporary Calgary asked to re-exhibit Not Over You. And they said, well, we'd like to reproduce this edition. What would you think of doing another run of the posters? And I said, yes, but would it be possible to do a two-sided poster? Because I just thought, I want to give people options. I don't necessarily take it for granted that everyone feels the same way, but I do. But I hope that you can see that the armature for the third word in the statement is always there, just in case you need it. Now, I really wish that I had an image of this, but I just want to quickly tell you the story about the re-exhibition of the sign, Nod Over You, at Contemporary Calgary, in part because I want to take advantage of getting this on record, because I like this story. What happened was that after the Dunlop took down the piece, it went into storage, and not at the Dunlop, but actually at the manufacturer, the site of its manufacture. And I didn't really ask too many questions about how it was being stored or where, and really didn't follow up on it at all. And so then when Contemporary Calgary started the gears turning for the exhibition, they set up the transport of the work, and when the sign arrived on site, it was covered in mud and dirt and spider webs and bits of pollen and junk, just base materialism all over the thing. The exhibition was opening, I think, 3 days after the day that I saw the sign in its condition, and it just seemed right, that to have this message that says "not over you" that someone forgot about and neglected, and it gathered dust, but then it came to light again. So I'm sorry I don't have a photo of that, but maybe the description is even more evocative. Okay, I'm just going to show a couple more projects since I only have a couple minutes left. This next piece that I want to share with you was a work originally shown at the Art Gallery of Alberta. And this is one more piece that came out of my practice of automatic writing, and is also connected to some of this spatial affective link that I've been describing. So what does it mean to say that there's a feeling behind something rather than on the surface of something or in front of something? In front of this lies my true desire for you. I don't know, just isn't something that's said in everyday speech. So I started to wonder, well, what would it mean to spatialize this message that says there's something behind this message? There's something literally and spatially and architecturally behind this message. If you have excellent vision, you can probably see that there's a very small seam going down through the E on true and the R on for. And that seam is the result of a door that exists in the gallery space that already existed in the gallery space. And if you've been to the AGA, you know that behind that door is the bar. And also the prep area, the passageway that leads to the prep area. And it exists so that this hall can be used for rental events like weddings and parties and things like that. And in the call for proposals for this space, it said in, I think, bold letters that whatever design was selected, that it had to integrate this door somehow. And this message was my way of integrating the door, but also this is installed at a different location, but it gives you a sense of how the door did open. So depending on when you saw the piece, you either saw it with the door closed or open, and almost always closed. Only in rare circumstances was the door left ajar. Okay, so materially, I decided to work with salvaged barnwood. And, oh, hello, you're back. Trusty friend. Yeah, I wanted to work with salvaged barnwood for a few different reasons. One of them is because of the highway that used to be called Highway Number 2, that I think is called the Queen Elizabeth Highway now, that connects Calgary and Edmonton. And when I was doing my undergraduate work in Calgary, I would often be on this highway going between my college and the place where my family lives. And on these bus rides, I would regularly see these collapsed barns with wood that had been sun-bleached and damaged by weather. And those forgotten bits of vernacular architecture, of course, they appear everywhere on the Canadian prairie and probably beyond as well. But one thing that I think is very unusual in Alberta is that there's a kind of tradition that's evolved of painting messages on the sides of barns that are on the highway. And sometimes they're just messages that say, RV storage, or I don't know, Jesus lives, or something like that. But, and that second message is actually one that I actually have seen more than once. But then there's this whole other genre of message that appears that's much more political and often has to do with the support of particular political parties, or even that makes messages that make very direct statements about particular political issues. So I've seen a range of different inflammatory messages painted on the sides of barns. And I won't go into what any of them are. I'll leave that to your imagination. But this strategy of using a piece of vernacular architecture, you know, a kind of handmade public piece of architecture in order to write out a very personal political message really appealed to me. And so I thought, well, I'm going to make my own kind of reference to vernacular architecture, to barn architecture in the middle of the gallery space. This is what's on the other side of the wall, which might look like nothing, but that's just because there's no audio component to this documentation, because what's playing is quiet disco. So the record is what's playing on the other side of this message. You can sort of make out that there are two small speakers at the top of the space. And then as part of that project, I also made a poster multiple. I couldn't resist. But this poster multiple, again, is a hand-painted kind of fantasy version of what I thought the piece would be. It was actually it's a scale model that I made with my father. All of those tiny little boards are tiny little hand-cut boards with tiny little nails that he and I put together. Is that heartwarming somehow? Yeah, and then I decided to, paint out this message on top of it. And this is another case where the font is something that's really deliberate, because this is a kind of hand-painted variation on the font that's used on grain elevators. Another piece of architecture that's really vanishing on the Canadian prairie. So it was important for me to make that reference back to that history. Okay, I think I'm gonna conclude there because I'm already 5 minutes over, which seems like a silly reason to stop at a certain point, but I have to stop eventually. So thanks for your attention, folks. Sure, yeah. I mean, I think that part of the empowerment comes out of some people's familiarity with other parts of my practice. So they think, oh, Mark gives away posters. Mark gives away pint glasses. Mark gives away. Mark gives and gives. Yeah, actually, I'm working on a new project that involves me not giving anything. And in fact, where people give things to me. It started as a joke, but it's really true. The piece that I'm doing for the Alberta Biennial this year is people doing things for me instead of me doing things for other people. So I think that's part of why people may have felt empowered, because the first couple of instigators of this soft form of theft are people who are known to me. But we didn't talk about it beforehand. They just started lifting them. So I think that's part of it. I think that the other component could be that some other people that are not known to me, that is not my friends and colleagues, saw these as mementos for a site that they went to. I never went to the Cecil Hotel myself as, you know, a white, middle-class, cisgendered, queer person. I didn't feel that in the 90s, as a 20-year-old or 19-year-old, it was the place for me, so I didn't go. But many of the people that came for the opening did go to the Cecil Hotel and partied there. And, you know, they saw these glasses, and I think that some of them thought, this is part of my history, so I'm gonna take one. But I think it started because of this connection with the poster multiples. And then other people that had this personal, I was gonna say sentimental, I'm trying to think of another word that doesn't have that negative, like, I don't know, nostalgia, or they had this personal connection with the history of the site, and because of that, that was part of the rationale for taking one. But I do think it started because of the posters. But I could be wrong. It's a speculation. No one that took one has explained to me why they took one, because they felt entitled to take one, so why should they explain it? And I haven't questioned them either. It's become this form of, I can't think of the word for it, but a thing that is not talked about. We don't speak of it. Yeah, thanks for your question. Yeah, I've wondered about that. I would like to show it elsewhere. Yeah, I think that it's quite specific to Alberta, but I've learned that there have been other Cecil hotels of ill repute. I'm told that there was one in Vancouver as well, another Cecil hotel that was you know, seen as a dangerous place to go. Apparently, I forget, there was one either in Medicine Hat or Lethbridge. So there's something about the name Cecil, or Cecil, as it should maybe be pronounced. Yeah, that there's some kind of louche association between Cecil or Cecil. Yeah, but I do wonder about that with the piece. I think it would be interesting to show it again in Calgary at another site, maybe an outdoor site, but I see it as being particular to Alberta. Why do I do automatic writing over a form of revised writing? I suppose one reason is because I already do a lot of revised writing in my academic work. And anyone who's done peer-reviewed journals, you know that, yeah, that's like revisions upon revisions. Maybe some of you are so good, you never get revisions, but I sure do. Yeah, so for me, part of the appeal of automatic writing is that it's a really alternative mode from the academic work that I do. Yeah, I mean, I think another reason is because I see a lot of productive potential in the irrational and the unreasonable. And I think that actually behind a lot of so-called reason, there is a lot of irrationality brewing. And for myself, I choose to access that kind of irrationality when possible. I'm doing a workshop on automatic writing tomorrow, and I have a presentation that I'm going to show the students then. I guess that's not open to every single person in this room, but how can I tell you about my process? Because that was the other part of your question. I guess my process is that I work at a lot of different scales using a lot of different materials, so I'm not always just using like a pen or a pencil or a keyboard even. Sometimes I'm working with like a big paintbrush or sticks to write out individual letters or whatever. So I mean, here I'm really influenced by people like Georges Bataille and André Breton, who played with speed in their automatic writing, so trying to slow down and speed up the process of accessing the automatic. Or people like Françoise Sullivan, who access the automatic through dance. So I guess that I think about my automatic writing in connection to a lot of these other automatic processes, like Françoise Sullivan's work. So for me, it's just one more way of accessing that responsive, spatially specific or affectively specific feeling or thing. I can show you things later if you're, if you want. Yeah. Why put it in Tuscany? Well, the fact that Calgary is so sprawling and has these outer reaches of community that are somehow still part of Calgary is worth reflecting on, for one thing. But also, I think that the implied message of sending the Cecil Hotel out into such a far-reaching community is to say, this message affects you, and as much as maybe upwardly mobile Calgarians who live in the suburbs might like to think that the Cecil Hotel problem has been eradicated along with its populations, that's not the reality of what's happened. And yeah, I wanted to set up a situation where, you know, this kind of imagined Calgarian citizen that I have in mind who feels very confident and stable in their upward mobility is confronted with a message that reminds them about people of other class orientations who don't share in the same comforts that they do. And actually, maybe I'll take this moment to flesh out one thing that I didn't say, which is that the reason that I've chosen to present the message backwards, and also it's a bit difficult to tell in this documentation, but the sign is also askew, it's not at a perpendicular angle with the wall, is to suggest that there's no clear or correct way of dealing with this history. I don't see that there's any way that we can look straight on at the history of the Cecil Hotel. We're always kind of looking awry at it, like thinking about paintings that use anamorphosis, where you can only see the painting from one angle, otherwise it's just a distorted mess. And I really think that no matter how we approach this history, there's always going to be some kind of distortion and messiness involved in it. Thanks for your question. Well, it's interesting what you say about slick and sleazy because, no, I think it's great because neon hasn't always signified that. You know, in the early 20th century, neon was a sign of electrification and modernization of cities. Cities like Vancouver loved neon in the early 20th century. And then in the 1980s, they started to hate neon. And actually, there are now bylaws that make it incredibly difficult to have a neon sign in Vancouver because neon has come to take on this louche, sleazy, slick association that you're describing. But so those things were on my mind. I'm not sure that that's something that I deliberately engineered into making this industrially fabricated version. Although if you could see it in person, trust me, it's a lot less pristine than you might think it is. It's, you know, it's actually rather dirty on the inside of the letters and just because of how it was made. Oh, you mean like the contrapposto position? One of my favorite, it's bad for the spine, but it looks good. Much like the orientation of this sign. Thank you. Yeah.
Well, Mark is going to be around, hanging out around the school for the next 2 days. So some of you are going to be participating in Mark's workshop tomorrow morning at 8:30 up in the print studio. And then on Friday, Mark is going to be doing studio visits all day with the 4th years. So he will be in the building. You may not want, he's got a tight schedule, but I'm sure that you probably can say hello. And if you have any more questions or thoughts or comments, are you open to that?
Yes,
Okay.
I am, yeah.
So thanks so much for your generous talk, and we're really glad you're here. Thank you, Mark.
Thank you.